Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right, hello. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader. And joining me, my co-host with his new studio that he's in. A beautiful That's Enough Out of You palatial studios.
Downtown Archibald. They're uptown Archibald, Billy.
It's Sean Kane. Sean, how's it going today?
Tremendous, buddy. Tremendous. What a great opportunity for us in this interview here. I mean, it was just fantastic, Billy.
Yeah, we had Owney DeStefano on, who so out today, in fact, coincidentally, is the new Robert De Niro movie called Alto Knights, which is De Niro plays both Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. And we haven't seen it yet, obviously, as we record this. It's before the movie comes out, but we certainly will be seeing it. But Owney DeStefano joined us on this episode, and he advised on this movie. He wrote a book on. Well, Sean, you talk about the books that he wrote.
Yeah, he actually wrote two books, The Deadly Don and The Top Hoodlum, which Nick Pileggi, who was famous from Goodfellas, used for the screenplay for this, and Tony advised him quite a bit on this. So he advised with the screenplay. So we had a great conversation with him. We covered a lot about the movie and about Tony's books and a lot about the history. And it was interesting, Bill, because it tied into a lot of the stuff we were talking about lately with Atlantic City and with the Irish and the Jewish. And he ended up talking about Tammany Hall with Frank Costello, the Irish political machine, and Jimmy Cagney, the mayor, which we talked about him. And then I, of course, brought up Owney Madden, which he talked about, and we talked about Arkansas. So we tied it to that. And he just gave a great, just so much insights. He's been investigating this for, what did he say, about 30 years?
Or more than that. Yeah, more than that. I mean, he said he started his career doing this 1977. And, I asked him about that during the interview. I asked him how he kind of got involved with it. And very interesting. The story he told was amazing about, what happened and what ended up happening with all of the research and the investigating that he and a group of guys did. So, very interesting. This is a great.
We talked a lot about the movie, and it's just can't wait to see it, Bill. Can't wait to see it. And he was honest about the liberties that Hollywood takes, but for the most part, it was pretty accurate. And just a great discussion. Then at the end, we talked to him about some of his other books. He's got a book coming up on Jimmy Burke, who we talk about a lot in this show. So we touched on that a little bit, and we'll have Tony back, and maybe even before the book comes out, because they said, what did he say, 26, 27, that book. So we'll probably have him on before that, because he's got a lot going on, and he has 11 books under his belt. And we also touched on, a couple characters, the Westies, Roy DeMeo, John Gotti, some of the names that, if you listen to any of our mob shows, all those names will be familiar to you. Lucky Luciano. And it was just amazing episode, Billy. I hope people enjoy it.
Absolutely. All right. So without further ado, we'll hit a sponsor, and then we'll get to our interview with Owney DeStefano. And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah. And there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy, and it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy. Tom's philosophy is great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
Well, start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
All right, Sean, we are here with Owney DeStefano, who is...
How are you?
Good. I'm fine, Bugs. Thank you.
Yeah. We're excited about this, Owney. We've been talking about this for weeks. This is a thrill for us. When we do our shows, typically when we do our shows about the mafia, it's just Sean and I talking about, things that we've researched and we've talked about. So to have a guest on, somebody who's done a lot of this research and who's written books and is currently writing a book and involved with a movie, all that great stuff. It's a real honor for us to have you on here, Owney.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy we can pull this together.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Owney, you want to just give a quick bio yourself, and then we'll get into the books, and then we'll get into the movie, The Alto Knights.
Okay. I'm Owney DeStefano. I'm a true crime writer and journalist in New York City. In my regular day job, I work at Newsday. But in the interim, I write a number of true crime books. I've been doing that for a number of years, based on my reporting of the mafia going back as far as 1977 and up till today. And I have a good 11 books out now, working on another one, the 12th. And it's been a genre which I thought people weren't interested in, but I'm pleasantly surprised that I was wrong. There's a lot of interest in these mob stories, and it never ends in fascination.
No.
And, it's just, there's a gift that keeps on giving, either in TV, movies, books, you name it.
So, Owney, the movie coming out with the great Robert De Niro, The Alto Knights, that movie's based on 2 of your books, right? The Top Hoodlum and what's the other one? The Deadly Don, correct?
Correct. Yes. Nick Pileggi, the screenwriter, actually encouraged me to write both books over the years. And he used them as a guide in his research, and sort of went through my materials and files and stuff to get his plot together, to get the storyline together. which he pretty much knew, but there was new stuff in there that he didn't know. In fact, he told me last night that, the books illuminated certain things for him that he hadn't been aware of. And that's how it came together. And he, pulled together the script. And this has been a long time in coming, by the way. He started on probably about 2015, 16. And the way Hollywood works, it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
And in the meantime, I got about 7 books done and published, and thinking that he was going to have Frank Costello already out years ago, when in fact it happened just now.
Wow. Now, are you considered a co-writer, or did you advise Nick Pileggi, who of course is famous from Goodfellas?
Well, did you say my
Like are you considered a co-writer on the screenplay for?
Oh,
this
no.
Oh,
This
your
was Nick's
advisor.
script. This was Nick's script. I
Okay.
advised him,
Okay.
and I gave him material, and I gave the director access to certain photographs that I had, which they may or may not have used in the setting. It's hard to tell, in setting Little Italy for that period. But I provided some information to them. I'm not a co-writer as such.
So let's talk about the movie a little bit. So it's based on, of course, 2 infamous gangsters, Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. Give me some overall thoughts. You said you've seen a screening of it?
I did. We saw a screening last night in New York, somewhat private screening with De Niro's Tribeca film crowd and some of the Warner Brothers people. And the film is 2 hours long, and it traces the involvement and friendship and the destruction of the friendship between Frank Costello on the one hand and Vito Genovese on the other hand. And it compresses basically their lives with flashbacks into about an 8 or 9 month period beginning in the fall of 1957. That's when Frank Costello was the victim of an assassination attempt by Vito Genovese,
Right.
in which Vinny Gigante,
Right. He was the hitter.
shooter. And it takes events in that period with flashbacks to show how their relationship was really coming apart. They had been friends for decades in the Luciano family, crime family. And then, over time, Genovese had to flee the country to beat a murder rap, and Costello had the reins. Luciano was, of course, in jail. And when Vito came back after the war, World War II, he wanted his due. And it wasn't that easy in coming. And that's where the friction really got started. Of course, the times had changed. Vito was away for a good 10 years. And Frank Costello was in charge of the family. And, things change. People have rackets, and, you got to be careful about how you do things. And that world is very treacherous.
Very treacherous, yeah.
I guess the watchword for the film is that, only a friend can hurt you. And that's basically what happens in the mob so often. And you see it in this film.
Sure.
Yeah,
Now,
we talk about all that.
go ahead, Billy. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Sean and I talk about it all the time, Tony. It's not your enemy that's gonna put 2 shots in the back of your head. It's typically gonna be your best friend, who you thought was your best friend. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. And you see that time and time again in these mob scenarios, either in films or in real life.
Right.
It's your friend who hurts you.
Yeah.
They walk you down the garden path, and you don't think the threat is going to come from your friend, but it does.
Right. Sure.
Very often. And that's what happens. A lot of these guys that get killed by people close to them.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, Tony, of course, Vinny the Chin does the attempted hit on Frank for Vito. And the legend is that, because Vinny the Chin would later take over the Genovese family down the road. But the legend is that because he was a young guy when he did this, that he still remained friends with Costello even after the botched hit. Is that true, or is that just legend?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it was, I think, Costello's lawyer who mentioned the fact that after the hit and after Vito went to trial and was acquitted, because Frank couldn't identify him as a shooter, or didn't want to, They socialize.
It's just business.
Yeah, it's business. Yeah.
That's amazing. No hard feelings.
No hard. Well, yeah, I guess not.
Right.
Deep down inside, I think they were.
So why do you think, I don't know if you can answer this, but why do you think, because De Niro is playing both Vito and Frank in the movie, why do you think they went down that road? Because I heard rumors that they were going to have Al Pacino play one of the characters early on. I don't know if that was true, but why do you think they went that route to have De Niro play both characters? That's kind of unusual.
Well, I think the story I heard was that after De Niro was cast as Costello, where he's really a dead ringer in terms of his looks, they were saying, well, what are we going to do? Who's going to play Vito? And they sort of thought about it. And they said, well, maybe De Niro can play both of them. And he was up for that. They talked about it with him, and he was up for it. And with the proper makeup and the proper costuming, De Niro was able to pull that role off as well. You'll see it in the film. There's really two different kinds of characters. Costello had the round face, sort of old. Genovese had the longer face, sort of more sort of craggy and chiseled. Always had the hat and the glasses, which helped in this characterization. So he pulled it off, and I was looking at it, and sometimes I said, "Well, it just looks just like Vito, and this looks just like Frank." And they did a little judicious makeup on both of them, because Frank aged, didn't age that well, but he aged, and you can see it in the film where they do the flashbacks.
Now, the name of the movie, The Alto Knights, is named after a social club in New York, correct?
That's right. Yeah, it was a social club that Vito and his crowd in the 1930s and 40s used as a base of operation. It was on the intersection of Mulberry Street and Kenmare Street in Little Italy, the northern part of it. And it was a club at that location. And of course, the cops used to surveil it a lot. And there's some old surveillance pictures outside the club. But that was the name, Alto Knights. Now, why Alto Knights? You know, it sounds like you're mixing operatic references to medieval history. I don't know where they come up with these names. There was the club down the road that became the Ravenite.
Right.
And, what is that?
That was Gotti's
Gotti's club, and of course, even before Gotti. Yeah. So I don't know where they get these names from, but that was the name. And De Niro, is funnily enough, De Niro as a teenager, I'm told, went into that club to play pool, because after Vito had left and it was no longer really a gang place, they had a pool table, and De Niro, from what I understand, actually went in and hung out there. So he's probably the only person I ever knew or who actually went into the club and is still with us. So it sort of resonated with him.
Wow. What else could you tell us about the movie? How because Hollywood likes to take some liberties. How much liberty do they take with this movie? Is it fairly, would you say, as accurate as you're going to get in Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean it's fairly. Look, I know the storyline cold for both men, and it's pretty close to true, but their liberties taken. The opening segment where Frank is shot, yes, that did happen, but the film makes it seem like it happened right after a charity event where Frank was the guest of honor. That didn't happen that way. That charity event was 10 years earlier. But they used it as a way of introducing Costello's character as a man of, not only a man of honor, but a man of clout and political influence in New York City. And that was an important part of Frank's makeup. So that worked well, because it really compressed things, but it got it into a way that you got the characters, a sense of the character right away. And you understood maybe why some people wanted to have him killed. Now, other things that were going on that where the film took some liberties, the Appalachian meeting upstate New York,
right,
where all the gangsters were sort of rounded up and rousted. the theory in the film, and it's portrayed as such, indicated as such, is that Frank sort of set them up. I'm not so sure that that happened that way. I think that, yes, Frank didn't like the idea of a meeting upstate, didn't go, he never went, but I'm not sure he actually set them up. There's,
Right.
that's one of the legends of the mob that you'll never get an answer to. But they use that in the film as a way of showing the duplicity between Costello and Genovese. And then there were other things, they had little things. I think the way that Vito met his second wife, Anna, they have portrayed her at a market. I don't think it was quite that way. She was already divorced, so she was hanging around. And I think Vito was a younger guy than is portrayed in the film when he met her. The two women who play these roles, by the way, Catherine Narducci and Deborah, his last name escapes me for the moment.
Messing, isn't it Deborah Messing?
Messing, that's it.
Yeah, they're both accomplished actresses. They're very good.
Yeah.
Narducci was in Sopranos.
Right.
She was in Sopranos.
She played Artie's wife, right? Artie
Bucco's wife.
Yeah.
And she was also in The Irishman. I think she played Russell Buffalino's wife.
That's right.
Right.
And she's been around. She's in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Bronx Tale.
That's right.
She's very accomplished, especially in this genre, the mob sort of genre. She nailed Genovese's personality to the T. Anna was a very tempestuous, conniving, scheming kind of woman, and it comes across. In Deborah Messing's portrayal of Bobby Costello, she comes across as a kind of nurturing, protective woman who is really not happy with the husband being in this mob life in the end, because he almost gets killed. And she comes across very well in that role. They both do. And I was impressed. Yes, there are liberties taken in certain events. I think the Kefauver hearings, where you see Frank Costello being questioned, and then you intercut that with the reaction in the mob social club, the Alto Knights. I don't know if that happened in the Alto Knights. These guys were going hysterical. I mean, those mob guys didn't react that way. Those old timers, it wasn't that way. But the liberty's taken. This is Hollywood. You got to get dramatic effect. You got to compress timelines. You got to change things around.
Right.
But the end product was good. I mean, I knew the story. Of course, I had a cheat sheet, right? I already knew it. But people were reacting. They were laughing at the right time. Some stuff was humorous. There were sometimes, I guess, shocked by some of the violence. And it worked. It worked. You got to like that sort of classic mob storytelling. And this is what the film's about.
Yeah. And as with so many of these mob movies, a lot of the Sopranos actors are in this. We talked about, Catherine Narducci, Michael Rispoli is in it. Vito is in it.
Yeah.
So, definitely has that flavor to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of characters. I mean, there's some characters you don't recognize. I mean, they're actors and actresses. I wouldn't know who they were.
Yeah.
No, is it true, Tony, that Frank Costello had a private meeting with J. Edgar Hoover?
Not that I've been able to find out. He did have a private meeting with the warden at the Atlanta Penitentiary with Vito. Okay. That's the story. They were both there at about the same time. I didn't hear J. Edgar Hoover. I know that. I mean, I heard that story, but I wasn't able to verify it.
Okay, that's what I meant. Yeah. Would you say one of the differences between the two men was that Frank was more kind of like easy with portraying himself as like a legitimate businessman and getting involved in politics, where Vito was more of like he's a gangster and he doesn't really care if people find out about it?
I think that's right. I think Costello's mark was that he was the prime minister of the mafia. He was the diplomat. He was the one with the political connections, connections to high people in high government. I mean, William O'Dwyer, who became the mayor of New York. You had Tammany Hall people. You had, Jimmy Hines, the old Tammany bosses, and you had a lot of these people were connected, and he was playing in that world, Frank. So
Right.
he had this veneer of respectability that he wanted to portray. He also said, look, I'm a gambler. He didn't shy away from that. And he also had a legitimate side, real estate. He had, other properties all over the metropolitan area. And he wanted to come across as legitimate. He wanted to get away from that. Of course, you never could totally, because the past always comes back at you. Genovese, not a good businessman. Yes, he had a job at the waste paper company, but a lot of his ventures really sort of foundered. And
Right.
he was kind of like headstrong, wanted to get his due. And then what really, I think, screwed him in the eyes of the other mobsters was when his wife had filed a divorce action against him. And in that came out, she put all this stuff on the record about, he's being the boss of this. He's got money coming in envelopes and bags. And he had racetrack interests. He had all this. She was portraying him as a mobster, which interestingly enough, months before then, she had denied to congressional investigators. So she was playing both ends of this. But that sort of really said, people were saying, oh my God, what's Anna doing to Vito? He's really showing his bad side. And ultimately, they didn't get divorced. What happened was she withdrew the petition and she sued for maintenance because she had no money, she said. And that's what happened. They ultimately split up, but not by divorce. They lived apart. Vito had his thing and she had her thing. She supposedly had, a relationship with a woman. And she was a bit of Anna, this is, a bit of a sort of scheming woman herself. To survive in that world, I think you have to be.
Now you mentioned Tammany Hall there, and that's we've been doing some episodes about that, and we've been doing a lot on a gangster that Costello was close with, Owney Madden. Did you?
Owney Madden, the old Irishman.
Yeah.
How
do your research cover that?
In doing the book, I came across Owney Madden. I think Madden ultimately left New York City and set up his operations in Arkansas, where I guess he sort of stayed out of trouble.
Well, that's what they say, but we've been looking into that, and it's like he really didn't retire. He kind of created a resort for gangsters.
Right, that's right.
Political empire down there.
The pictures I came across, and they're in the book, of Costello and/or his brother, Eddie, going down there.
Yeah,
to spend some time.
They were fictional.
It looked like it was in the fall because the trees didn't have any leaves and they were all sort of dressed appropriately. But that's right. I mean, that period, if you're looking into that period in Tammany Hall in New York City, was very interesting. Mm-hmm. The new book I have out called Broadway Butterfly, about the woman sexual extortionist, deals with that whole era. It deals with Tammany Hall, the gangsters connected to it, and her murder, which ultimately led to, was a catalyst to the events that got Jimmy Walker out of government.
Right.
Mayor Jimmy Walker.
Mayor Jimmy Walker, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't know her, he didn't kill her.
Right.
But things were so bad after her murder, the great public outcry. People were getting fed up with Walker. And they were saying, Jimmy, you got to do something. The government is not doing anything. And the do-gooders, the reformists pushed back at him. They got investigations going on. They found out Walker was taking money from people doing business with City Hall in the city. And ultimately, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? Then the governor of New York State, held his own hearing, brought in Walker to testify, and he was about ready to throw him out. just like Hochul could consider to do with Mayor Adams today. But in Walker's case, Walker saw the writing on the wall and he said, I'm out of here. And he quit.
So let's get into your books, Tony. So let's talk about the top Hoodlum book and Frank Costello. And let's talk about the background. So, basically him and Luciano kind of take out what's called the old mustache Pete's in the old timers. You want to start there, or do you want to go before that?
Well, we could start there. I mean, Costello and of course Genovese were part of the Luciano orbit.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened, of course, in that period was that the old mustache Pete's were in control of a lot of the rackets at that point in old New York.
Right.
We're talking 1920s, early 1930s. And the young guys, wanted to have their say, and there was a power play. They schemed against Joe Masseria, who was the preeminent boss at the time,
Right.
and had him assassinated with Luciano at a restaurant in Coney Island. In fact, it was, I think, just before, I think it was April 14th in 1931, as I recall correctly, if I'm right on this. So many dates. But Masseria was killed. That opened the door for Mr. Maranzano to take over the sort of combination, to get everybody together. And they had a meeting in the Bronx where he was going to be the anointed boss of all bosses, and people were going to be, subservient to him.
Right.
Well, that didn't last too long.
Oh,
because he was becoming as imperious as Masseria was. So Luciano, Costello, I'm sure Genovese and some of the other guys got together and they killed Maranzano. And that opened the door for Luciano to become became the commission for the board of directors of the mob around the country, mainly New York, but Chicago and other places.
Right.
And it was then that, the modern commission for the mafia got its genesis. And they had the rules and they settled disputes. They set up rules for membership and they, meted out discipline. And you know what that would have been. And so that was the legacy of Luciano in that period. Luciano got into trouble about 1936 with a prostitution conviction, and the reins passed, they say initially to Genovese, but I think it was more Costello because he had more of the political clout. And then Genovese had to leave the country on a murder rap.
Right.
So it was Costello holding the reins of power. So Costello did what he did. He was a gambler. He was a big prohibition guy, Costello, much bigger than, I think, Vito. And it was ultimately when Vito came back after World War II and faced the murder charge and had it dropped for a variety of reasons, one being that the main witness was dead. That Vito wanted his old power and old rackets back. He wanted his old share of the business. And this is portrayed in the film where the tension really gets strong. So in a nutshell, this is the sweep of mafia history from about 1931 to about 1947, 46. And then, stuff starts to happen. There's antagonism. The families are in flux. A lot of the families are in flux. People die, they disappear. And ultimately, Vito makes his power play against Frank Costello, and there we go. Frank sees the writing on the wall. They're going to kill me. I got to get out of here. He retires, but gradually. I mean, he doesn't do it right away.
Right.
It's portrayed that way in the film too.
Well, how much influence did he really have after he so-called retired? He still was well respected.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, look, Frank was well respected. He was a man of some political influence. The FBI talked to him. for information, but they didn't get anything. And he maintained that he was out. And in fact, he was about ready to write a book with Peter Moss about 1971, 72. They were talking, they took notes, tapes and stuff. And they were pretty close to making the deal, Moss and Costello, when Costello dies.
Wow.
So those tapes, Mrs. Moss looked for them. She couldn't find them. So, you know, it would be interesting to see, but hey, what are you going to do? They may be lost to history.
So, you know, it's fascinating because back then, you didn't see that happen very often with those guys. You know, the code of silence that was still very strong. I mean, now, you know, they all have podcasts, but
I know. Yeah. That's a great irony.
Right. But yeah, during that time, I mean, you know, it really predated Sammy the Bull and, you know, when guys started to turn state's evidence and, you know, tell all books and everything. It was very,
sure. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think just before, or around maybe a little after, Moss did a hookup with Joe Valachi, who was like the big turncoat in the 60s. And
Right.
he wrote the Valachi papers. And, but Costello would have been something different if they ever wrote that book.
sure. Yeah.
It would have been amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
Tony, talk about the legendary suicide of Abe. Is his last name Rellis?
Rellis. Yeah, Rellis. Well, Rellis was a witness developed by William Dwyer when he was Brooklyn DA and investigating Murder, Inc.
Right.
Rellis was a character in Murder, Inc. He knew things. He probably had done some hits. And he was turned, and they had housed him in a hotel in Coney Island, the west end of Coney Island, off the boardwalk. And look, the story goes, he was kept in protective custody, but somehow Rellis was pushed or fall or jumped out the window and killed himself at the hotel. And that ended the big witness for, which I think was the key guy they were gunning for. So Rellis, there was a report that said Rellis tried to escape himself. Other people deny that and think that, you know, the cops were paid off and looked the other way or did in Rellis, get him out the window. You know, he had a very short sheet, 6 feet long, and it was up about 10 stories, maybe even more. And, you know, I don't know where you were going to go with that. You weren't going to get down to the ground floor.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting. That's another thing that'll never be solved. There are all sorts of stories, you know, myths and half stories about it. But it makes for great mob history.
Is that portrayed in the film at all?
It is. There is a section, yes.
Okay.
It pretty much shows, you know, Rellis in the hotel, and then they have news photos of the time of the where he would have fallen, and they actually have a picture. I think it was an actual death picture of Rellis on the tarmac on the roof of the hotel. So it's portrayed. Yeah, it is portrayed.
You know, a lot of people, when they point to the the downfall of organized crime, a lot of people point to Gotti, but do you think this whole saga with Vito and Frank is really the beginning of the end? Like once there's an attempted hit on the boss, it kind of opens the floodgates to for what would happen down the road. There'll be other murders, Albert Anastasia and of course Castellano later on. But do you think this whole saga with Vito and Frank was kind of the beginning of the end, or do you think it was
Well,
when
that's
guys
an
start-
interesting question. I think that the thing with Vito and Frank and the antagonism and the Board of Appalachia meeting showed for the first time to the public the influence and power of the mob, and got public galvanized, the politicians mainly, galvanized against the mob. So there was this long history of decline after that. But it didn't all decline. We know that over the years, the Gambino crime family, the Genovese crime family, became very powerful.
They did,
making scads of money,
Oh yeah,
rackets. So
pretty
it
much
was
everything.
it was a long decline,
right.
with periods of lucrative business. But then after Gotti sort of energized the feds, and they wanted to get him, and they got him.
Mm.
And that put everybody else in the spotlight. We had the Bonanno crime family infiltrated. The feds, the feds went fits and starts, but ultimately they were going in the same direction. And they were hobbling the crime families into the 2000 up till today. And it was the mob is not today like it was.
No.
Right.
Not like it was.
No.
It still exists in terms of
Mhm.
traditional mafia, organized crime. But there are other players in the game, and you know that. You've got the cartels out of Mexico. You've got the syndicates out of Italy, the 'Ndrangheta, and still the mafia over there. You got other
Right.
factions. The Russians, to some extent, are really kind of not a factor at this point. But you've had the Asians, you've had the Albanians, you've had other Balkan groups. So there's a lot more players here. And I think the mafia today is not ruled by any particular strong person. I think they're governed by committees. And a lot of the influence in the American mafia is with the Sicilians. They have sort of a good operational presence on the street. People with Sicilian background.
Yeah.
And that's how it's sort of evolved. It's committees that sort of run things for these families.
You mentioned the 'Ndrangheta there, very powerful, of course in Italy, but internationally very powerful. How much inroads has 'Ndrangheta made in America, would you say?
There's been some. I picked up bits and pieces about that. They're not that present here in any substantial degree.
Right.
Those sort of associates and people believed to be members who are here, single people, ones and twos, but there's no grand presence. Their really strong point is Europe.
Right.
And that's where their major influence is. Not so much here. But they are powerful. They are powerful.
Oh, they're very powerful. Why do you think that they never made inroads in America? Do you think they just never attempted, or do you think because the strength of American Cosa Nostra at one time kept them out?
No, I think that they realize that they can do better over there.
They could do things over there that they can't do here.
I think they can do better over there. I think that's where their base is, their political influence is, and a lot of their power, I think, resides in Europe.
Right.
And to do something here, to transplant, that takes a lot of connections. And, let's face it. I mean, the feds may get onto you. They have pretty good intelligence now.
Yeah, and the thing is, they over there, I mean, they have no problems in out through Europe, killing judges or law enforcement. Where in America, American Cosa Nostra kind of always frowned upon that. They didn't want to. They knew nothing good could come from that.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, they realize that once you go after the cops, you kill a judge or prosecutor, you're going to get a lot of heat. We saw that, recently in the Bonanno crime family history. where that was alleged to have been a threat. And that brought a lot of heat, a lot of heat.
Is the Albert Anastasia hit, is that, I'm sure that's portrayed in the movie, correct?
It's portrayed, yeah. It's pretty bloody.
Oh, yeah, well, that's
It's
an
pretty-
infamous murder. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, Albert Anastasia and Frank were very close. And as Anastasia was around, portrayal is that Frank Costello was protected. I think Vito and the others knew that if they wanted to get Frank out of the picture or weaken him, they had to go after Anastasia. And Anastasia has her own issues. I think there's stuff that was floating around about him, some sort of corruption. But to suffice to say, it was portrayed pretty realistically. You know, the barber chair, the barbershop, it made it look like the barbers were in on it. They knew something was happening, and he's pretty much gunned down. So that's it. Pretty brutal.
Wow.
Crazy. Hey, Tony, I got a question for you in your career.
Yeah.
So did you at some point make a conscious decision that you wanted to report on this, that this was a road that you wanted to go down, or did you kind of just fall into it at some point? I met Terry McShane when we had him on.
That's fair. It's a good question. I mean, in my youth, I was working at Fairchild Publications, which among its other things had Women's Wear Daily. And while working there, they came up to us, a group of us, and they said, we want to do a series of stories on the mafia in the garment industry, 7th Avenue. Pretty prevalent.
Sure. Yeah.
And like, we were babes in the woods. We didn't know anything about this stuff. So we started off like anybody else. What do? You go to the old newspaper accounts, you go to the old magazines, you talk to investigators, you talk to old cops. And gradually we put together a very kick-ass kind of 10-part series about the mafia on 7th Avenue, the garment industry. And that sort of created waves in New York, like we didn't expect.
Wow.
And at that point, we said, I said to myself, this is pretty interesting. You're not in Kansas anymore. you gotta pay attention to this stuff. And we did. And over time, and see how to show you how things have changed. Back then, there were 3 of us working together, and we had to do the old style reporting, gumshoe stuff, right? You didn't have databases. You didn't have computerized programs. You didn't have court records easily accessible. Today, we did that same story. We probably could do it in maybe 2 months because the information would be there. And the other thing is that everything we wrote about, just about, was borne out by history. Certain people who we had to dance around to say maybe they were, maybe they weren't in organized crime, turned out to be in organized crime. So, and all the elements of control that we suggested turned out to be true.
Yeah.
So, history sort of vindicated us. And to tell a story, you probably remember the name Elliot Spitzer.
Sure.
Yeah, he became governor and his own issues. Prostitutes. And he was a prosecutor in Manhattan and came across our old stories and used them as a way of sculpting a prosecution against the Gambino crime family's control of the garment trucking industry. And this is many years later, after we wrote those stories. And they did an investigation, indicted Tommy Gambino, Carlos' son, his brother Joe, and a host of other people. Ultimately, they settled the case with a plea bargain in which the Gambino brothers gave up certain trucking companies and were able to keep, certain other businesses. But that's how that developed. I mean, that how it came from those stories. And Spitzer told me this many, many times. So, your stories that did this, we figured it out, how to do it. Okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Another question for you, Tony. When we had Larry McShane on a few weeks ago, and we mentioned the Castellano murder, and he said he was one of the first people on the scene. He said he heard it. I don't know, come across a scanner or something. I forget exactly what. And then he ran down there. Were you on the scene there? Did you happen to be there at that night?
No, I wasn't on the scene. I was at home, and I saw the report come in. Of course, there wasn't much I could do at that point.
Right.
McShane, his office was up the street, so he was about 4 blocks away. He was able to get there pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Murray Kempton, who I worked with as he was a columnist at Newsday, venerable columnist, was in the office at Newsday and called Jimmy LaRosa, who was the attorney for Castellano, and said, "Jimmy, I think your client's been killed." Because our office was 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
Had I been there, I would have gone, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
I was home.
Yeah.
So that's how LaRosa found out about it, and that set history
Sure
on its head at that point. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on in the mob. And they expect the FBI knew pretty quickly who did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they had been surveilling them long enough to kind of figure out what was going on there, and it was pretty obvious, I think, by that time.
Yeah, they also had some very good informants.
Yeah,
were telling within hours that it was Gotti's crew.
Yeah, and I don't think Gotti was that shy about it. I don't think he cared who knew, including.
No, I think he wanted to be the preeminent gangster of the time.
Sure. Yeah,
and he showed up days later at the Ravenite club. It was like sort of the way he was greeted indicated that he was a man now.
Right. Exactly.
He was a man.
Yeah. Interesting. Sean, what else we got?
Well, let's talk. We talked about the top Hoodlum book. Let's talk a little bit about the Deadly Don book on Vito, and if you want to talk about a little when he does the self-exile in Italy, and he's running the black market there, basically under Mussolini. If you want to start there, wherever you want to start, Tony.
Well, Vito got indicted for a homicide in the 1930s in Brooklyn. And they were indicting a lot of people around that. And they got to Vito. Vito got wind of it and left. He left his wife, Anna, in control of the businesses and with the children. I had 2 children. Anna had 1. He had 1 with her. And he went to Italy. It's about 1930s, I think 6 or 7. And I don't know how long he expected to stay, but he fell in with the fascist crowd, made some donations to them, and he became, a favored sort of person, rich American, to help the fascists. Became close to Mussolini's son-in-law, and I'm sure he probably met Mussolini himself. Ultimately, we have World War II, right? So Vito's not going to come back. Transportation was not in the cards. He had signed a power of attorney to Anna to take over his businesses, to caretake them, which she did, but he complained about it later, that she was sort of cheating him. He wasn't happy with that, but there's not much he could do with it. He's over there in Italy. There's war. You're not going to get back. Okay, the war ends. The Americans set up a provisional government in Italy, and Vito, smart as he is, I suppose, offered his services as a translator, which they did use him, but he was also running a black market operation. There's a lot going on: military goods, food, supplies, equipment, and he ran that. And the military got onto him, and they conducted investigations, but they didn't charge him necessarily for that. I think what they did, though, is they found out that he was wanted back in Brooklyn on the arrest warrant. So, okay, we take him into custody. We send him back on a boat to Italy. and he was sent back. I think there was an investigator, army investigator, who was with him on the steamer, and they talked about things, rackets, and so and so and so. It's portrayed in the book. And then Vito gets back to Brooklyn, is arraigned, goes to trial, was about to go to trial, and one of the key witnesses winds up dead in jail. They say from poison. But then happened, you don't have a witness. All you have was somebody who was an accomplice. And under the New York law, you couldn't be convicted on the basis of an accomplice testimony. You had to have something else. That something else, that other witness was dead. So, prosecution was in a bind, and the court had to dismiss the indictment, but not before skewering Genovese and saying, look, I think you're guilty. You've done a lot of bad stuff, but there's nothing I can do. So he was free. And that's portrayed in the movie, that whole scene, that whole chain of events. Vito walks out the court, and goes back to the Alto Knights, and he's greeted by a big party, but Frank wasn't there. So that was another bit of friction between the two. Hey, I'm free, feeling great. Why didn't you come to my party? You know, that.
Right.
So that's how that played out. And nobody was ever convicted, I believe, on that homicide charge. I don't think ever. I think the other cases were dropped just as
well. So I want to talk to you about another topic, but is there anything that you want to wrap up the movie with, or anything on Vito or Frank that we didn't cover that you want to cover?
Well, I think, Frank and Vito were both part of the mob, but they were totally different personalities. They approached the mob differently. I think their life paths differed greatly, and that influenced what happened. Frank was able to back away from the mob after he was shot and realized that things were not going to go well with Vito in charge. Vito was hot-headed. He was involved in narcotics. To what degree is always a subject of debate. But that was a bad time to be involved in narcotics. We started indicting and convicting a lot of mob guys, including Vito Genovese. Genovese winds up in jail, just as Costello would have predicted, and dies in jail. Frank Costello, after backing away from the mob as the elder statesman, died in his own bed and as a free man. And he may not have had all the money and power that he could have had, but it shows you that, well, your friends can hurt you. If you're smart enough, you can get away with it.
And these guys rarely die like kings, right, Tony? I mean, they either die, at the hands of, like we said, some, assassin, or in jail, or broke. It's not really a good ending for these guys.
That's true. I mean, Vito dies in prison. Yeah. He had an estate worth about, they say, looked at the records, $2,000. Frank Costello died in his own bed. He had real estate. He had some means, but the government got a lot of that for back taxes.
Right.
A lot of these guys, they don't make a lot of money. There are a lot of guys who are brokesters. They scramble. They live from day to day, racket to racket, score to score.
Yeah.
Guys like Joe Messino, who had $10 million in assets in his house, are the exception. Messino was very smart, not very educated, but very smart, and had a lot of money that he squirreled away, and a lot of real estate, some from legitimate businesses. So, but that's the exception. Right. A lot of these guys, if they don't die poor, they'll die in jail with all of their money spent for lawyers, and their families are kind of, in some sense, pauperized. They're kind of scrambling. Yeah. There are exceptions. There are some exceptions.
Yep.
So Tony, this was great. We kept you here almost an hour, but I do want to talk to you. I want to ask you a little bit about the book that you have coming up, and then hopefully, if you want to come back when the book comes out, that'll be fantastic. But you got a book coming out on on a character that we talked quite a bit about on the show, Jimmy Burke.
Jimmy Burke. Jimmy Burke, one of the quintessential Irish gangsters of his time, the architect of the Lufthansa heist,
Right.
reputed to be a stone cold killer. Estimates vary from 7 bodies to some people say dozens, or as many as 50.
Yeah.
We'll never sort that out. But he was quite powerful, quite unpredictable, likable, but if he got a drink in him, you didn't want to be around to cross him. And
Right.
that's shown in the Goodfellas, what De Niro portrayed, in fact, the Jimmy Burke character, Jimmy Conway.
Right.
And the book I'm dealing with, look, a lot of Jimmy Burke's criminal history we've heard about, not all of it, but I was able to dig out other stuff. But the really interesting part in his story, I think, was his early childhood, where he basically was an abandoned child. And I think that impacted him.
Yeah.
I think if you deal with a lot of children who are abandoned and don't know their parents, I think it influences the way they grow up and what they do and how they approach and see life. And that's part of my story. I've been developing that. And of course, the Lufthansa stuff, we got new information on that. And when the trial in 2015 of Vinny Asaro was charged with that, Lufthansa, but I got acquitted. But still, the record was tremendous. I mean,
Yeah.
Burke life goes all through that trial and history. So it's fascinating. So it's interesting to pull this together now and talk to people.
When is your book coming out, Tony?
Well, from what I understand, it's going to be either late 2016, early 2017. So that's the story.
26 or 27, you mean?
Sorry, 2026
26.
and 2027. Yeah.
But you did write a book on the heist, though, right? You wrote a separate book.
I did. Yeah, that was 2018. That was 2017. I have a heist, the big heist. That's one of my books. The Messino book I did, The Last Godfather. There's going to be a new edition coming out in 2026, revised edition. I'm going to revise the back end of it a bit because we had events. Messino turned state's evidence.
Right.
He lived as a protected witness, and he died, about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And, that'll bookend that story.
Interesting.
All your years of covering organized crime, did you happen to cover the Westies and Roy DeMeo at all?
Yes. The DeMeos were a thread. DeMeo was a thread in the story I did about the book called Gotti's Boys. And also, he's been sprinkled in other books that I did. He was a pretty ruthless killer, too. A group of psychopaths in the mob.
Yeah.
And, he was one of them. He'd like to kill. He was like a frenzied killer. He's part of that sort of Gambino cluster of people and cases.
Right. What about the Westies? Did he cover them at all?
Westies, yes. They're part of the Gotti's Boy story.
Okay.
Because Castellano had an alliance with the Westies, and ultimately, they did some work for the Gambinos. But they're not. The preeminent book was T.J. English's book on the Westies.
Right.
But he's got the territory on that.
Yeah.
Good history. Good history.
Yeah.
Yeah, just we've talked about this before, but with the Westies, when the Gambinos have to rein you in, you know that you're out of
Yeah, it's that was an amazing time in New York City, the 70s, 80s, 90s. After about 2004 or 5, when Messino got convicted, sort of the air really came out of the mafia in New York City.
Right.
But they're still kicking. They're still kicking.
All right. Well, Tony, we thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. And when this podcast episode is released, it'll be the same day as Alto Knights comes out. So
Good.
yeah,
Good.
we encourage everybody to go see that. We'll certainly, Sean and I'll be, we'll be there. We'll certainly go see it.
Oh yeah, it's a 2-hour film,
Yeah.
and you'll see it. You'll be hitting some of the stuff for the first time. I knew the story,
Yeah.
cold, so
Yeah.
I knew where everything was going. But other people were laughing and gasping and enjoying it, enjoying the characterization. So be interesting to see how you feel about it.
Yeah, definitely.
There's always stuff you'd probably want to do better, if you were doing the film. But hey, this is it. You got to put up or shut up at some point.
That's right. As a famous director once said, films aren't released, they escape. Right?
And there are a lot of films that don't get made.
That's true. Yep.
But luckily, this was made, and that was a long time coming.
Yeah.
I give credit to Nick Pileggi for staying with it and having his infectious enthusiasm for it and carry forward in Hollywood. It's a good old style gangster film.
Yeah. Well, we're excited about it, and congrats to you for being a part of that, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tony.
All right.
Okay, take care, guys.
Take care. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.